Makes no difference who you are.
Here to introduce you to this new series is Walt Disney.
In our modern world, everywhere we look, we see the influence science has upon our daily lives. Discoveries that were miracles a few short years ago are accepted as commonplace today. Many of the things that seem impossible now will become realities tomorrow. One of man's oldest dreams has been the desire for space travel, to travel to other worlds. Until recently, this seemed to be an impossibility. But great new discoveries have brought us to the threshold of a new frontier, the frontier of interplanetary space.
Now here's a model I designed for a 4-stage orbital rocket ship. Compared to the unmanned instrument rocket, it is quite large. But the overall size and weight of the rocket is mainly determined by the 11 tons weight of this top section. This weight dictates the amount of fuel and the numbers of motors needed to produce enough power to equalize the gravitational pull of the Earth. The payload in the top section will consist of 10 crew members plus equipment. Notice the wings, small rocket motor, and landing gears. This is a section that must ultimately return the men to the Earth safely. To produce the energy needed to hurl this stage into the orbit, we need these 3 additional rocket-powered sections. Here we have a cutaway drawing of our rocket, showing the location of the fuel and the motors of each section. The first stage carries 1,060 tons of fuel, and its 29 motors will lift the entire weight of the ship vertically off the ground. The second stage has 8 motors and carries 155 tons of fuel. It will be dropped when its speed has reached 14,300 miles per hour. The next is our third stage, with only 1 rocket motor and 13 tons of fuel. The third stage gives the passenger section the final kick to attain the orbit. It will not be separated from the passenger section until just before the return flight. The third stage will be left in space, and a very small motor in the winged fourth stage will return the ship to the atmosphere so it can glide back to the base. If we were to start today on an organized and well-supported space program, I believe a practical passenger rocket could be built and tested within 10 years. When all the sections are joined together, the ship and its crew will be ready for man's first flight in space. Let's look ahead a few years and see how this might be accomplished.
There it is, a small atoll of coral islands in the Pacific, where man is dedicated to just one cause, the conquest of space. Here below us, a small city has been created to house the scientists, engineers, and technicians on whose shoulders rests the tremendous responsibility for this great adventure. This is the Rocket Assembly Building, with tracks running to the launching site. Only 48 hours remain until firing time. Our spaceship moves ponderously toward the firing site. After the
X minus 30 seconds. X minus 20 seconds. X minus 15 seconds. X minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
total firing time has been 5 minutes. The ship will now coast for 51 minutes before the adaptation maneuver begins. At over 60 miles above the Earth, the crew members experience the sensation of weightlessness for the first time.
Blockhouse to XR1. Your cutoff altitude is 63.9 miles. Distance from launching pad, 705 miles. Velocity, 18,467 miles per hour. Angle of elevation, 4 minutes of arc. Plane of your ellipse of ascent incline, 66 degrees, 32 minutes, 2 seconds to plane of equator. Out.
51 minutes later and halfway around the world, the rocket is coasted to its maximum altitude of 1,075 miles. Its speed has diminished to 14,770 miles per hour. The navigator must now take a bearing on 2 fixed stars. He will line up the ship for the adaptation maneuver, which will drive it into a circular orbit around the Earth. Electronic controls will fire the rocket motor at the exact second the ship reaches the proper position. The ship and crew are now coasting freely and silently through space.
Air Force Kettlewick Iceland calling XR1. We have you in radar contact at 107 miles due south this station at 29. Estimate you at Prestwick Station Delta at 37.
Tests and observations by the crew will lay the groundwork for the future construction of the space station and will add to our knowledge of many sciences.
Rocket approaching from 3 o'clock high.
At a pre-calculated time, the rocket's path will cross that of the instrument carrier, sent into space a few years before. 22 hours after takeoff, our spaceship has made 11 revolutions around the world. It is now time to make the return trip. The engineer releases the 3rd stage. It'll be left circling in space. All tests are now concluded. The navigator checks the ship's position for return firing. 1 minute to go. The automatic firing timer is set. The ship is lined up so the blast of the motor will be against its forward motion. This will slow the rocket's speed and cause it to begin its long glide back to Earth. The ship is now moving 1,000 miles per hour slower. After coasting halfway around the world, the rocket will leave the vacuum of space and sweep into the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere, where air friction will gradually reduce the rocket's speed. When the ship drops to an altitude of 50 miles, air pressure will build up on the control surfaces. For the first time in the entire flight, the captain will be able to fly the rocket as a normal plane. Air friction begins to send the skin temperature of the rocket climbing until the ship glows cherry red at 1,350 degrees. The double hull and refrigeration keep the crew from perishing. The returning rocket continues the long glide down into the lower atmosphere, its temperature gradually dropping to normal as airspeed diminishes. Mission completed. Man has taken his first great stride forward in the conquest of space. His next goal will be the exploration of the moon, then the planets, and the infinite universe beyond.